Watched my boyfriend transform around his best friend, who was visiting, and now I'm doubting our entire relationship. I've been dating this amazing guy, let's call him Josh, for about 6 months now. Everything just clicked between us from early on. He's thoughtful, smart, and we're so compatible. I've definitely fallen for him, even though neither of us have dropped the L word yet. Until recently, things felt like they were building into something really serious. Right from the start, Josh was open about his best friend, Sarah. He'd tell me how they grew up next door, have been best friends since they were 9, and even lived together for a year after college. But for the last few years, she's been working overseas. He always said they spoke regularly, but never went into much detail. I honestly just assumed she was like a sister to him. Then, out of nowhere, Sarah decided to come visit, and asked to stay with him for the whole week. Josh said yes straight away without even talking to me first. That's when my doubts started creeping in. When Sarah finally arrived, she told us she's actually moving back to the States but isn't sure exactly where yet. She did mention it's probably not going to be anywhere near our area, but it all just sounded so up in the air. The moment she showed up, Josh changed. His whole vibe was different, his sense of humor, the way he acted around me, it all shifted. It was like I was suddenly an outsider to their little universe of inside jokes and endless stories. He just kept talking about her, about all these amazing things she's done. There wasn't anything obviously flirty between them, but after one evening together with the three of us, I could just feel this deep history they shared, something almost impenetrable. The first night she was here, I stayed over, but he wasn't interested in sex at all. He just said he was tired and brushed me off, which is not like him. The next day I was supposed to come over in the afternoon. I ended up sitting on his steps for an hour, waiting, until he finally showed up, with Sarah. Apparently, they'd gone out for a walk and lunch and just forgot I was coming. He had left his phone at home. I was furious, so I just left. He only came by my place later because Sarah nudged him too. I keep telling myself he isn't the kind to cheat, but I can't ignore how emotionally attached he is to her. It feels strange, she just comes back after years away and it's like nothing changed between them. Their bond is obviously strong and full of shared memories, but I can't shake this suspicious feeling that it's more than just friendship. Supposedly, she's leaving in 5 days, but she doesn't even know where she's headed next. I keep wondering, am I just an irrationally jealous girlfriend? Or is there really something else here? Part of me wants to ignore this and just wait it out, but another part of me thinks I need to say something before this turns into something I can't fix. Update 1. I took some advice and decided not to call or text Josh at all yesterday. The silence weighed on me, but I forced myself to let it be. Then, out of the blue, Josh called me last night after work and asked if I could come over to talk. My heart immediately sank. I was sure he was going to break up with me. But instead, what actually happened might have been even worse. When I got to his place, Sarah wasn't there. She'd gone out somewhere for the night. Josh sat me down, and just started talking, really talking. The truth about Sarah came pouring out. They're best friends, sure, and apparently they talk and text way more than I ever realized. But, yes, he admitted, they used to be involved, too. And then he described her as more than an ex, which just left me totally confused, until he explained. After college, he and Sarah lived together and actually dated for a while. Not long into their relationship, she got pregnant, by accident. But the pregnancy didn't go as planned, the baby died before birth. I still don't know exactly what happened, whether it was a miscarriage or something else, but from what Josh shared, Sarah was pretty far along. The loss was devastating and traumatic for both of them, and even though they tried to keep their relationship going, they barely lasted another 6 months. Eventually, Sarah accepted a job overseas, and they broke up sometime after she left. He told me that, until this week, the two of them had never really talked about what happened. And now, with her suddenly back in town, he's realizing he never actually grieved the loss of the baby. He told me he needs some time with her to process everything, to try to get closure, and hopefully to move on. And I just sat there, stunned. Not only is she not just a friend, she's the mother of his only child. Of course I asked him why he'd never mentioned any of this before. He said he'd planned to tell me about losing the baby if our relationship took things to the next level, but we hadn't gotten that far yet. And as for Sarah, she just vanished from his life so quickly after everything. He figured she was a non-issue, until she suddenly showed up again a few days ago. Now, I'm completely bewildered. He apologized and asked if I could just give him a few days with Sarah before she leaves again, so they can both get some kind of closure. He says he wants to move on, and apparently, so does she. She's the one who's been urging him to talk to me honestly. I still have 1,000 questions for him, but I didn't ask any of them last night. He looked so shattered by everything, I couldn't bring myself to press him. I've never seen him like that before. In the end, I stayed over again. We ended up having sex, maybe out of comfort, maybe confusion, I don't know. This morning, we both woke up early and left for work. And now I have no idea what to do next. Should I step back and give him space? Or should I tell him exactly how I feel, and ask him not to shut me out while he's processing all of this with Sarah? Half of me wants to just go over and talk to Sarah myself this afternoon, but would that just be weird? I don't want to break up with him if he's being honest, and if this really is something that will actually resolve after she leaves. Still, my biggest fear is that, Even if they both move forward, he'll never fully cut Sarah out of his life. After all this, she holds a special place in his heart I'll never really have. I'm just so lost on where to go from here. Update 2. After I sent the texts I'd been advised to, Josh and I barely spoke for the rest of the day. When he got off work, he called me, and our conversation felt awkward, careful. He told me he'd see me the next day, Saturday. I found out that Josh and Sarah had been planning to go on a hike together that day, but he ended up getting called into work instead. So, I went over and took Sarah on the hike. To my surprise, it went really well. We talked a lot about Joshua. She told me stories about growing up with him, painting these pictures of what he was like before I knew him. I admitted to her that he'd told me about the baby, that we talked about it. I could tell she was taken aback by that, maybe even a little upset. She didn't really want to talk to me about it, and her silence hung over us for a while. Still, we somehow agreed it was good for Josh to finally talk about it and start to deal with everything. At the end of the hike, Sarah turned to me and said she thought I was really great for Josh, that she was happy he had me. I could tell she was probably just being polite, especially considering how everything went down after that. I spent the rest of Saturday hanging out with both of them, though there was unexpected drama that night when Sarah hurt her foot and we ended up spending hours in the ER. Sunday morning, I stopped by Josh's place early before heading to teach a class, not just to pick something up I'd left there, but honestly, to see how the two of them would act around me. When I came into the kitchen, I caught Josh holding Sarah, hugging her tightly like she was about to fall apart. She seemed to be crying. I just blurted out, "What the hell is going on?" Josh immediately got defensive, asking why I kept coming over, and for the first time ever, I completely lost my temper at him. I yelled, demanded to know why he didn't want me around. He didn't yell back, but his quiet anger only made me more suspicious. We argued, and then Josh went upstairs to grab my bag for me. While he was gone, my eyes landed on this big box, like a folder, on the table. I opened it. I should have mentioned, Josh is a designer and artist for his job, but he always spends his free time drawing, working on these graphic novel-style illustrations. What I found inside nearly broke me, page after page of Sarah. Or at least, some character who looked just like her. It must have been months, maybe years worth of work. And he never once showed it to me. In that moment, all I could see was that she'd been his goddamn muse the whole time. That all this emotional energy had been poured into her, not me. The fury and hurt that exploded in me, I lost it. When Josh came back down, I grabbed the folder and I threw it, hard. Something glass inside shattered with a deafening crack. Not my proudest moment. I feel dumb about it now, a part of me wishing I'd torn every single one of those drawings to shreds. I was screaming, totally falling apart, and Josh just stood there, quiet and angry and trying, uselessly, to calm me down. Then Sarah walked in, saw the wreckage, and asked to talk privately. She apologized, genuinely, I think. She told me Josh never cheated with her. Maybe she was being truthful, maybe not. She said she had no reason to lie, that she knew this whole week had been a disaster and that after tomorrow she'd be gone and I'd never have to see her again if I didn't want to. She said she was taking full responsibility for what had happened and hoped that once she left, Josh could finally face the things he'd refused to deal with and move on. I never brought up the goddamn drawings scattered everywhere, though I knew she saw them. I was too undone, too rattled, to even try to handle that conversation. So there I stood, shaking, crying, facing the woman I was convinced my boyfriend was in love with, both of us crying about him. Deep down, I knew this was probably the end of my relationship. But I couldn't bring myself to leave him right then, not with her there, not right in front of them. Maybe it sounds childish, but I just couldn't let them have that satisfaction. I figured I'd talk to him later, maybe the next day, and finally end things. Instead, I grabbed my stuff and left. Not that it mattered. Josh came over that afternoon and broke up with me anyway. I guess all of you were right. He told me he'd realized this week that he wasn't in any place to be in a relationship, that he had too much to work out, that it wasn't fair to keep me waiting. I asked him, did he sleep with her? He said no. Did he love her? He said yes. Were they getting back together? He didn't know. Supposedly, they hadn't even talked about it and it wasn't the only reason for the breakup. Probably a bunch of lies, but honestly, it's irrelevant now. I just feel stupid. Angry. I can't stop picturing them together this whole week, probably, even now. I know I shouldn't, but with her scheduled to leave today, I still have this awful urge to drive by his house just to see if she actually did. I'm gutted. All I want is to crawl into a hole and forget this ever happened, but I know I can't. It sucks so much. Update 3. I did the thing I knew I shouldn't. I drove past his place the next morning. The rental was still out front and his blinds were up and I hated myself for slowing down. I was about to keep going when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded wrecked and weirdly apologetic and she asked if I could give her a ride to the airport because Josh wasn't available and Uber kept canceling on her because she had crutches and a giant suitcase, and honestly, I said yes before my brain caught up with my mouth. Maybe I wanted a last look at all of it, maybe I wanted answers, maybe I just wanted to be the person with the car and not the person left behind. When I pulled up, she came out a minute later half hopping down the steps, and tucked under her arm was a flat, brown wrapped rectangle, taped all over the edges like she was carrying a bandaged wound. I knew before she even said it. It was the frame I'd shattered. She slid into my passenger seat and put it gingerly on her lap and said, almost like a confession, it was the baby's footprints. The little inked ones the hospital takes. She said she kept them in the studio portfolio because it felt safer there than in a drawer that might get soaked in some random leak. I felt something hot and nauseous run through me and I started apologizing so fast I tripped over the words. She kept saying it was okay, she'd taken a photo years ago, there were copies, she promised, and then she half laughed, half cried and said TSA would probably tackle her if she put a glass splintered frame through the scanner. We sat in my driveway for 5 minutes picking shards out from the tape with a pair of tweezers I found in my glove box, two strangers performing surgery on this awful little relic of their lost life. Traffic was a wall, so we crawled in the car filled with that brittle, floaty silence that happens when you both understand you're sitting in the crater of something. She talked first. They hadn't slept together. She said it without me asking and looked at me like she was daring me to call her a liar. She said Josh had asked her to stay and she told him no because she's leaving for real, because this time she isn't coming back to orbit him every few years. She said the hug I walked in on wasn't about me or him, not exactly. I remember how small her voice got when she said she'd found out at the ER she was early pregnant, so early they wouldn't x-ray her foot until they confirmed, and she hadn't known how to tell anyone because the only person who'd understand the way taking a test can feel like an earthquake was the same person she shouldn't be leaning on anymore. I didn't say anything for a long time. I watched a guy in a pickup flip someone off and realized my hands were shaking. At the terminal she patted her jacket, her bag, patted everything again, and then looked at me with this sick, resigned face and said she'd left her passport on Josh's kitchen counter. I swear the universe was playing a joke on me. We turned around. She called him and he didn't pick up. We pulled up to his place and the front door was unlocked and the kitchen looked like a murder scene, not just because of the glass glittering in the grout but because there were these little, rust-colored fingerprints on the edge of the sink. Josh was sitting on the floor with a dish towel wrapped around his hand, eyes blown wide like a startled animal. It wasn't dramatic. He grabbed for one of the bigger pieces wedged into the baseboard and sliced his palm. He looked from me to Sarah, and for the first time since I've known him he didn't look like the person in the room who had it together. We took him to urgent care. I drove. Sarah pressed the dish towel tighter while he stared out the window and kept swallowing like he'd swallowed words wrong. He got 3 stitches. The nurse asked if he had anyone to drive him home and he gestured at both of us like, unbelievably, that was still true. In the stupid little exam room with those watercolor prints of trees and clouds, Sarah finally told him about the pregnancy. She did it quick, almost businesslike, like if she let it get soft she'd shatter again. He closed his eyes and sat there very still. He didn't look at me for a while. When he finally did he said he was sorry for everything, really said it, and I believed him in a way that made me feel even worse because sorry doesn't unbreak glass or unthrow anything or undo the week he let me drown in. He said he didn't sleep with her. He said he isn't getting back with her. She nodded. It was the first time I believed her, too. We drove back so Sarah could grab her passport and rebook. She moved around the house like she was packing a life she hadn't meant to unpack, and at some point she put the little footprints in a cheap plastic frame we found in a closet because she refused to carry them wrapped in tape again. It was getting dark when she asked if we could stop by the river before the airport. It wasn't a plan, we just ended up there because the air was softer and none of us could stand a fluorescent ceiling a minute longer. We didn't have flowers or speeches or anything. She held the frame and said the name out loud, the name they'd given their daughter and never said to anyone else, and Josh bent over like someone had taken a belt to his middle. I stood back because it was theirs and I had no right, and then he looked up at me with eyes so wrecked I stepped forward without thinking and put my hand on Sarah's shoulder and the 3 of us just stood there, ridiculous and broken and somehow all a little quieter inside than we'd been all week. In the parking lot he handed me an envelope. Brown paper, my name written in pencil like he wasn't sure he should be writing it. I didn't open it there. I drove Sarah to the airport again and this time she went through security without looking back. When I got home, I sat on my kitchen floor with my shoes still on and opened the envelope. It was a drawing. It wasn't Sarah. It was me. Me on his steps, knees pulled up, the day I'd sat there for an hour and left. He'd drawn the exact way my hands were around my phone like I was keeping it from falling. He'd gotten my hair wrong and my mouth right. On the back he'd written I'm sorry and then scratched it out and written I should have told you the truth sooner and then please don't think I ever used you to forget her. I couldn't. I don't know what to do with that drawing. It's on my kitchen table right now and I keep walking past it and then doubling back like it might move when I'm not looking. I'm not getting back together with him. That isn't the point of any of this. I think they actually closed something there by the river, finally, and I think whatever happens with her now has nothing to do with me. In the car she said she was going to Chicago, not back overseas. She said the father knows. She said she'll be okay. I believe her in the way you believe a stranger you've watched cry quietly and pick glass out of the past with you. I slept for 12 hours and woke up to a text from an unknown number with a photo of that stupid plastic frame on a window ledge somewhere with a line of sun across it. Thank you for driving me, was all it said. I stood there in my apartment, holding my phone, and for the first time in days I didn't feel like I needed to check his street or his blinds or any of the places you go when your brain is eating you. It's over. Not clean, but over. And somehow that feels like the only honest thing any of us did. Update 4. I thought the sun on that plastic frame was the end. My body had other plans. Coffee started tasting like pennies. I gagged brushing my teeth. I counted days and they didn't line up, then they did in a way that made my brain go blank in the drugstore all while I stared at a wall of pink boxes. Back at my sink, the second line slid in so fast it felt mocking. I took another one. And another. I sat on the edge of my tub with my jeans around my ankles and thought, of course. Of course. I didn't call him right away. I walked 2 laps around my block like that would shake the word loose. It didn't. In the end I texted him, I need to talk about something important, can you meet me by the river? He replied okay in under a minute. He got there before me and was sitting on the low wall like last week had frozen him there. He had a thin silver scar where the stitches came out, a little raised comma across his palm. He saw my face and stood up like he was bracing for impact. I said it fast before I lost my nerve. He went very, very still. Then he put both hands on his knees and said okay in a way that didn't mean casual. He said he would support me no matter what I wanted to do, that he wouldn't try to fix it with promises. That weren't fair. He said he'd started seeing someone on Tuesdays, grief counseling, a real human with a real office and Kleenex, and that he hasn't spoken to Sarah since the airport except to send her the tracking number for a box of her stuff. That he would not push for anything with me other than honesty. We stood there with the March wind needling through our coats and I thought about how quiet the river can look while still pulling very fast. I told him I wasn't asking for us back, I wasn't even asking anything yet. I just didn't want the first person who knew to be a stick I peed on. We made an appointment together and then I made him go home. I didn't want to sit in a diner pretending to eat a sandwich. I didn't want to go back to his kitchen where the grout still flashed with a microscopic glitter and certain lights. I went back to my place and stared at the drawing of me he'd given me and put it face down because I couldn't take the feeling of being looked at by a version of myself who didn't know what she knew now. The clinic was bright, almost aggressively kind. The nurse asked me if I wanted anyone in the room and I said no, and then I regretted it and then I didn't. The ultrasound tech used a voice like velvet and turned the screen away until I asked her to let me see. It was a dot. A tiny, stubborn dot like a punctuation mark that had decided to become a sentence whether I liked it or not. 5 weeks, she said, and printed a shape that looked like static and handed it to me like it was a precious thing. I walked out with a little manila envelope and the smell of bleach still in my nose and sat in my car and watched my own hands shake. I texted him I'm okay and we can talk after work. He sent me back a thumbs up followed by I'm here. I went to teach my afternoon class because life doesn't stop because you're wrecked. My students were bad in the exact same ways they were last week and I found it comforting. I spoke about thesis statements like my insides weren't building a life or ending one or both. After, I sat in the parking lot and opened a voicemail from a Chicago number. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded steady, threadbare but steady. She said she was sorry to call me, that she knew it was weird, but she hadn't wanted to leave it hanging. She'd taken care of it, those were her exact words, and she was okay, and she was moving into a sublet in a week and starting a new job the week after. She said she hoped I was okay in a way that meant she didn't know what okay would even look like for me and she wasn't going to pretend. She didn't ask me for anything. She hung up. I told him about her message when he came over that evening. The river talk had taken everything out of both of us and we sat on opposite ends of my couch like teenagers at a chaperone dance. He didn't say her name, he said mine. He asked me what I wanted. I told him the truth, I didn't know yet. I didn't want to make a decision because I was scared or because he was sorry or because there was a ghost in our story that would keep getting up. He nodded and it looked like it hurt. He brought a paper grocery bag full of my things that I didn't even remember leaving at his place. A book I'd put face down on his nightstand the week I still believed in us, a pair of socks I thought the dryer had eaten, a little ceramic dish I'd been using for rings. At the bottom was the broken frame's glass, wrapped in a towel. He said he couldn't throw it away, not after what it was for, and it felt wrong to put it back in his trash. I took it because he was right and because I could. Later, I slid the glass out into my garbage and threw the towel in the wash and it bled a constellation of rust-colored dots and I thought, everything is keeping stains right now. I told one person who wasn't him. My sister came over with lemons and ginger and sat on my counter while I cried. She didn't offer me a moral. She asked if I wanted her in the waiting room for the next thing and I said yes. We didn't say what the next thing was, we both understood we'd know when we knew. He texted me a list of whatever you need offers that somehow didn't feel like pressure. Rides, money, the mind-numbing company of someone who will watch 6 hours of baking shows with you and not talk. He asked permission before he touched me at all and when I leaned in he put his hand flat between my shoulder blades and didn't try to make it about remembering us. I didn't let him stay. He didn't ask. 2 days later, we had a real conversation like adults who might co-parent or might not and still have to look at each other without baring teeth. We sat at my kitchen table in the ugly yellow light and talked about practical things with an almost offensive lack of romance. Insurance, names on forms. The fact that we live 10 minutes apart and that 10 minutes can be an ocean if we let it. He told me he had a rotation at work he could switch if I needed mornings or nights covered in the short term. He told me he'd tell his parents when I was ready to decide anything at all, or not, and he'd live with either. I wrote things down that I thought I'd remember and immediately forgot, because that's what my brain does when it's overwhelmed. It drops the grocery list on the sidewalk and stares at the clouds. He brought me soup the next night and left it on my doorstep because I told him I wanted to be alone. Inside the bag was a smaller envelope, different paper, the thick kind that feels like it wants to be kept. The same careful pencil had written my name. I thought it might be another drawing and braced to be seen again by a version of me I didn't sign off on. It wasn't. It was 3 pages from a sketchbook. The first was that character that looks like Sarah, only the lines were lighter this time, less haunted. The second was the river, ugly and honest. The third wasn't either of us. It was a lemon, halved on a plate. The texture of the rind worked over so lovingly it made me weirdly furious. On the back he'd written, "I'm going to stop making art out of people who don't consent to being art." I don't know if that's everything, but it's a place to start. I took the lemon drawing and stuck it to my fridge with a magnet because it felt safe to let that live in my house. The clinic gave me a week to sit with it before they'd schedule anything else. That week stretched and snapped like taffy. On Thursday he texted to ask if he could come with me to the next appointment if I wanted. I said yes and no in the same text and then corrected it and said I'd tell him the morning of. He sent back okay. On Friday I walked to the river alone. It was warmer. College kids were sitting on the grass with their backpacks like it was already summer. I stood in the same spot we'd stood 3 times now, once at the end of something nobody could name, once at the middle of a grief that wasn't mine, and now at this ridiculous new edge, and said the names of the people who exist because I've known him and the ones who don't. Saying their names out loud didn't fix anything. It did make the air feel more honest around my face. On Saturday my phone buzzed with a photo from an unknown number. It took me a second to recognize the windowsill from the first text, the stretch of sun. The cheap plastic frame again, but this time there was a little postcard leaning against it, a colorful, loud Chicago diner menu with a smear of ketchup across the bottom like a signature. No text, just the picture. I stared at it and realized I didn't clench. Sarah is alive in a different city doing normal, dumb things like getting ketchup on cardstock. It felt good in the strangest, smallest way. I'm telling you all this without a neat bow because there isn't one yet. I have another appointment on Monday. He's picking me up because I asked him to. My sister is meeting us there. He'll sit with us in a waiting room that smells like hand sanitizer and he will either go home and I'll go upstairs, or I'll go home and he will come upstairs later to look at a black and white dot become something else. I don't know what I'll choose, just that whatever I choose, it will be mine. And this time, somehow, everyone seems to understand that matters. Update 5. Monday started mean. The sky had that low ceiling that makes all the sounds feel closer, car doors and shoe heels and the little hiss of the bus kneeling to let someone off. He texted I'm outside and I looked out and he wasn't on the sidewalk, he was by his trunk wrestling with an umbrella, like some vaudeville bit until it popped open and made this hollow blossom sound. He held it over my head like we were at a funeral we hadn't announced. My sister was already at the clinic when we got there, chewing a piece of gum like it was the only thing keeping her upright. We walked through a gauntlet of voices that didn't belong to us. He didn't put a hand on my back. He positioned the umbrella between me and the yelling like you can make weather out of nylon when you need to. Inside, the air was bright and smelled like lemon cleaner, which felt on the nose in a way that would have annoyed me if I wasn't trying not to throw up. The TV in the corner was playing a cooking show with the sound off. Someone somewhere cracked the top of a water bottle and the click made me jump. They did the thing where they tell you the words the state makes them tell you and the nurse did it with the exact amount of compassion you give a person who has to sign their name 3 times in a row to make sure they mean it. I signed. He sat 3 chairs away from me like we were in high school detention and the teacher had separated us for whispering. My sister squeezed my knee under the clipboard's edge and then let go like she remembered she wasn't my hand to hold for every second. The doctor's shoes squeaked, and weirdly that helped. Ordinary noises, regular physics. I swallowed the first pill with one of those paper cones of water that always taste like their own material. They gave me a brown paper bag with the rest of the plan in it and a set of instructions that made me feel like I'd been trusted with a fragile science experiment I couldn't mess up if I just read every line slowly. He drove me home and didn't park in my spot because he said he didn't want to take it from me. It was such a small, dumb sentence and it broke something tight in my chest. My sister made a nest out of my couch with blankets I didn't know I owned. He put his phone face down and then turned it over and then face down again until it looked like he was flipping a coin and hoping for an answer that wasn't one of the 2 regular sides. We watched an episode and a half of some British woman trying to make cake out of vegetables and my sister fell asleep sitting up and I counted my breaths like they might organize my insides. When it was time for the rest of it, I told him to wait in the living room. He didn't argue. He stood up and put his hand in the air and then dropped it like he'd remembered he promised to ask. The bathroom light is always too honest in the middle of the day. I sat on the edge of the tub where I'd sat with my jeans around my ankles a week ago and stuck the little white tablets against my gums because that's what the paper said. They tasted like chalk and something medicinal that felt invented purely to be unpleasant. The cramps came like a tide being mean on purpose. My body folded around nothing I could see. Time got weird and watery. I'd see the grout line where the tile meets the baseboard and think of his kitchen floor and then the next thing would be the towel rack with the one loose screw I keep meaning to fix, and then it would be my breath again. My sister knocked once and slid a heating pad across the tile with her foot, and I said thank you to the door like it was a person. At some point it was just me and a little plastic colander and the worst parts of biology, and I will not narrate that for you because it was mine, but I will say the human body is an efficient machine when it decides to be, and it made me feel like both a witness and a perpetrator. I kept thinking of punctuation, of the text saying dot, of the way one small thing can be a beginning and an ending depending on where you're standing. When the hurt rolled back, I crawled onto the rug and lay on my side and looked at the cabinet like it might have answers. He stood in the doorway without crossing it until I said you can come in, and even then he sat on the floor with his back to the tub and put his palm up like we were 5 and about to play the hand game where you smack too hard and pretend you didn't mean to. His scar caught the light and looked like a tiny crooked smile. He didn't say a story about this making us stronger, thank God. He said only if you want me to stay, and I said stay for 10 minutes, and he stayed exactly that amount and left when I nodded that I was okay for the moment. My sister made rice I didn't eat. The heating pad hummed like a small, faithful thing. The lemon drawing on my fridge felt like it was watching us, but in a good way, and for the first time since he'd given it to me I didn't turn it face down. The next morning, my body felt like it had been rung like a bell and left to settle. He showed up with toast and a bottle of blue Gatorade because he said once he'd gotten really sick on a camping trip and that color was the only one that didn't make him feel like he was drinking windshield wiper fluid. He sat on the floor again, because I didn't want anyone on my couch or my bed, and he told me he'd called his therapist and booked a second day each week for a while and then immediately looked like he regretted telling me, like he was putting something on me I hadn't asked to carry. I told him it wasn't mine to carry and he nodded like he believed me, and even if he didn't yet, the nod itself mattered. He said he'd told his parents we weren't together and was going to tell them nothing else until I decided what else there was, if anything, to tell. He said Sarah had texted him a photo of a sandwich bigger than her face with the caption first day, and he'd sent back a thumbs up and then put his phone down and gone for a run. And the only reason he was telling me that was because he wanted me to know he was practicing not turning every message into a doorway. It all sounded both deeply boring and like the most careful thing a person could do. A package came in the afternoon with a return address that was just a street and a number, no name. Inside was the cheap plastic frame, the same one we'd wedged those little footprints into the night before the airport. The frame was empty now. There was a postcard from Chicago tucked behind it, one of those old-timey reprints with fake creases printed on it, and on the back she'd written in tiny, crooked letters, "The real frame is with him, like it should be. If this one ever holds anything, I hope you choose it." No signature. I put the plastic frame on a shelf and then moved it twice and then finally slid it behind a stack of cookbooks I never used so the corner stuck out like a placeholder for a future I might or might not have. Around dusk, he texted me a photo of his kitchen floor with the caption, "No more glass." The grout line was unglittered and boring and beautiful. He'd scrubbed it out with a toothbrush, he said when I asked later, and it had felt like stealing a tiny thing back from a week that had taken too much. He asked if I wanted to go to the river or if that made me want to throw his phone into traffic. I said I wanted 10 minutes of the good kind of quiet. We walked there without touching. The sky had decided to be pink for once instead of iron. College kids were still on the grass being loudly alive. We stood by the same dumb rock we keep accidentally using as an altar, and I took the ultrasound print out of my pocket. It had been in there all day, softening at the edges. He looked at it and then looked at me and then looked at the water. I didn't throw it in because I don't litter, but I did hold it flat in my hands until the corners curled and then folded it in half and then again and put it back in the little manila envelope and then the envelope back in my jacket. He exhaled like I'd made a decision for him he didn't know he needed. On the walk back, we passed a couple arguing about a dog leash and it made me want to laugh, and I did, a small, surprised sound that felt like finding a quarter in a winter coat. He stopped like he was afraid to scare it off. I told him I wasn't going to move through this like a ghost. He said okay, in that way he'd learned, the new one that meant he'd heard me and was not about to turn it into a manifesto. That night, my sister fell asleep on my couch again, her foot wedged at an angle that would make her limp tomorrow. I slid the brown paper bag from the clinic into the back of my closet with the same care you give a shoe you wore to a wedding you don't want to think about yet. I put the lemon on my counter and cut it in half, and the sound was so clean it almost felt like a spell. I pressed the rind to my wrist and let the oil make little starbursts in the skin. He texted me from his apartment a photo of his scar with a band-aid that had dinosaurs on it because he said the nurse had given him a handful as a joke and he decided to take the joke seriously. I rolled my eyes and then smiled anyway because sometimes stupid is the only currency you're rich in. I'm not telling you the choice like it's a plot twist because it wasn't a twist. It was a door I opened and walked through. My body is quiet. The apartment has its normal ghosts again, the hum of the fridge, the neighbor who plays the same guitar line wrong and then right and then wrong every night around 10. The river is still doing what it always does, pulling hard under a face that looks almost still if you don't watch it long enough. He went home. I slept. In the morning there was a text from that same unknown Chicago number, just a picture of a diner glass with a lemon wedge teetering on the rim, the sun turning the water into cheap stained glass. No words. I didn't clench this time. I sent back a checkmark and put my phone face down, not because I was hiding but because I didn't need it to narrate the room to me. I don't know if we will ever be some version of us again that looks like what we tried to be. I do know he didn't make a drawing of yesterday. He sent me a photo of a toothbrush with grout dust on it like a tiny, stupid trophy, and it meant more than anything he could have sketched. The lemon on my counter is already drying out at the edges. I could throw it away, or I could keep it until it goes hard and small and becomes something else. For now I'm just letting it be yellow in my kitchen, which feels like all the bravery I have, and somehow, today, enough.